Okay, well, welcome everyone. This is the first of a few sessions that we're going to be together. My name is Chris Sarsky. I am with one of the consortia. In this case, I work out of the CARC consortia, which head office is in Ponoka. And I have fantastic partners that I work with all the time. And I'm going to get Ted to introduce himself and Karen to introduce herself. Ted, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Ted Zeroni. I'm working with the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium, or the ERLC. I'm currently working at Sherwood Park today, and I'm really excited to see so many of you here. I know it's a warm, warm day in May, and the end of the school year coming to an end. I know it's a big rush for everybody, so really appreciate you taking the time to be with us this afternoon.
You bet. And Karen, welcome aboard.
Hi, Chris. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Bloomhagen, and I work for Explore Learning. I'm an implementation coordinator, and Explore Learning is the maker of Gizmos. Gizmos are a resource available to Alberta teachers currently to support the implementation of math and science. And I'm really happy to be here to join the session today. I will be doing sessions in the future and probably some in the summer and the upcoming school year to help you get started with using the simulations if you would like to with your students. And I'm here today from Forestburg, Alberta, so about 2 hours outside of Edmonton.
Right on. Thank you, Karen. And so for all of you, I see in the chat box, people are looking for where to go for session 1. Let's maybe clear that up for everyone right off the bat. When you got your confirmation email saying that, yes, you were registered, in that confirmation email was a link, and that link allows you to get into session 1. And if you don't find that, at the end of the session, I'll take a few minutes and show you where those 2 sites are. And then you can find your way there regardless of whether you find that link or not. So we will get you all there at some point. And so today we're going to unpack living systems, just to give you a little bit of background on the order that we're doing things. We didn't kind of just drop it out of the air and say, oh, we're going to just start with living systems. When we did the pilot group and we had unpacked all of the grades, K to 6 in the pilot sessions, we actually at teachers' request started with living systems. But in hindsight, as we started to unfold your new curriculum, we found that the order that we're going to present it in was a good fit for the concepts as they started to link together. So if you watch session 1, you're familiar with the fact that you are now in a spiral curriculum. You're no longer what we called in the pilot a science in a box. You're not teaching grade 1 science anymore, and you have your 5 topics. And then basically when they were done grade 1, you walked off and they went to grade 2 and they just started something new. Now what happens in kindergarten affects grade 1, affects grade 2, affects grade 3. So those concepts build, and it's really important that we know what the previous concepts were. So we found that starting with living systems was a good place because many of the key concepts that we need to build on get revisited again in some of your other ones. So we will get started today. We've got lots of stuff to share with you. Feel free to put notes into the chat box if you have questions, but also equally as well, don't hesitate to just unmute yourself and ask a question. We'll also have time at the end if there's anything there that you want to ask. So let's get started. So it's called session 2 because you already watched session 1 in the previous session.
What is Indigenous worldview? What is
I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement, and wherever we can with our land acknowledgement, we're going to try and tie in the Indigenous perspective into whatever it is we're studying. In this case, we're talking about living systems. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm going to actually enlarge it, and then I'm going to just fast forward it for a bit, but it ties very well into our topics, and then we'll start with our acknowledgement. If I can get everyone just to mute themselves to make sure that we don't have you on recording, that would be great. So I'm just going to fast forward it to 2 minutes in.
Understand about Indigenous worldview. So let's talk through the basics. The first thing you need to know about Indigenous worldview is what the heck worldview even means. Now, what is worldview? I know I already mentioned what worldview has to do with different perspectives on the world, but let's define it even further. A worldview is a collection of attitudes, values, stories, and expectations about the world around us. These inform our thoughts and our actions. Our worldview is expressed through ethics, religion, philosophy, beliefs, etc. Overall, worldview determines how people live and how it can be shaped in any number of things, including ancestry, community, and social structure. Worldview is also how we think about our relationship between ourselves and other living things. You have a worldview that shaped you and has determined your beliefs. In the same way, Indigenous people have a unique worldview that influences absolutely everything we do. By learning about Indigenous culture, traditions, practices, and teachings, you are engaging with an Indigenous worldview. So let's talk more about that. The second thing you need to know about Indigenous worldview is the fundamentals of this worldview. Now, what is an Indigenous worldview? The guiding principle of an Indigenous worldview is that all living things are connected. Appreciation for all living things is a prominent Indigenous value which comes directly from the Indigenous worldview. Indigenous people live their lives under the principle that all living things contribute to the circle of life equally and should be acknowledged and respected as such. Indigenous people believe that the connection to ourselves, to the Creator, to Mother Earth, and all living things are integral parts of existing. That is why the land and other natural life is so important to an Indigenous worldview. Understanding that all living things are connected and that everything plays an important role in the world is an integral element of an Indigenous worldview. These principles are what guide the teachings, beliefs, values, and practices of Indigenous communities. Now, the third thing you need to know about Indigenous worldview is how it differs from Western worldview. Now, how is Indigenous worldview different from Western worldview? Most commonly, Western worldview is based on the assumption that man is superior. Instead of all living things being equal, living things are structured in a hierarchy. An Indigenous worldview is based on the idea that humans are equally important to plants, animals, and all other living things. Western worldview traditionally treats humans as the top of the hierarchy and everything else falls below them, which shapes the way we treat plants, animals, and nature. This often leads to misusing, mistreating, or disrespecting other life because it labels humans as most important. Indigenous worldview can be visualized as a circle, while Western worldview can be seen as a ladder, or a collective outlook versus an individual outlook. This structure is the primary difference between Indigenous worldview and Western worldview.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there, and I think you get a good sense of where this is going, and it links so well to our session that we're doing today, which is on living systems. So we always have to keep the Indigenous perspective in our back of our mind, and those outcomes are also stated within our curriculum document. So having a little bit of background knowledge for ourselves as teachers before we launch into some of those outcomes is definitely a helpful piece. So we'll try and embed some of those every time we do something so that it is relevant to what it is that we're studying. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation in a way that history may have forgotten. So I'm going to tag team. I'm sorry, I'm just going to bring this up a little bit so that we can bring it down here. There we go. I'm going to tag team with Ted today, and he's going to start taking us through some of the opening pieces. And then what we're going to do a little different than we have in the past is we're going to intertwine the information about how am I going to teach this with resources in between all of this. So we're just going to go back and forth. So Ted, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Chris has a slide here with the agenda that we have. The background during the conceptual overview is going to be a little bit of a tie-in from session one, which is the overall framework of the curriculum. We won't dwell on it too much, but just in case you missed session one or still can use a little bit of a repeat of some of the key things that'll be provided for you in the first couple parts, but we won't dwell that much time on it. The bulk of our session today, we'll take a look at not only the concepts and what they are in terms of in this living systems organizing idea, and perhaps how to teach them and how to instruct and assess them. We'll also look at the skills and procedures and the understandings, looking a little bit closer what they are, and again, some examples and resources of how those can be taught to our students. We are fortunate to have a couple individuals join us for later on through a video, not live here, for a little bit of a discussion on science, scientific method, and computer science. We'll talk about that when that comes up. Just as a background, we're really using the framework of Surface Deep and Learning, is sort of presented by Hattie and everyone else, Hattie, Fisher, and Fry. We can go to that slide, please, Chris. This is where we talked about the three phases of learning: surface, deep, and transfer. And they're all vitally essential into the learning process. We often think that what we want our students to do when they leave our classrooms at the end of the day and leave our schools at the end of the day is to transfer those meaningful pieces of learning that they learned in our classrooms, in our schools, in our education system, and apply them to their lives so they can be successful every day and contributing members of society. So the big question is, how do we move from getting them from service of just knowing stuff to really understanding connections between stuff and transferring that into the situations they find themselves into the world so they can be successful in confronting that? So that's the process we're going to look. Surface is introducing kids to the basic concepts and basic skills and making sure they understand what they are. When we get into the deep part of learning, that's where we make connections between the concepts and the individual concepts. I mean, that's where we get the understandings, and we'll see that in a little bit. That each understanding, when you look at the curriculum guide closely, is composed of a series of concepts strung together in a sentence. So how do we create those connections, and how do we get students to explore those connections? And then again, a transfer is very similar to the deep part. That's where we just give students newer and newer contexts or situations and new material to work with to apply those understandings and those skills so they can more easily transfer them when they leave us in our classrooms. So let's begin with the concepts and a conceptual overview. Just as a review, a concept is simply an organizing idea. We can go to the next slide, please, Chris. An organizing idea of just one or two words. And in this particular case, we can see the concept of fruit visible in these examples. And fruit has some distinctive attributes that make a fruit a fruit. We classify a fruit in the way we do because it has certain attributes. And there are multiple examples of fruit, and just as there are multiple examples of every concept out there. So once again, just an organizing idea of one or two words. It's got characteristics that make it so, and we can think of examples from a multitude of contexts. In the next slide, just a couple more things maybe to help you understand what a concept is a little bit. It really is just a category of information. It's like the schema in our mind. It's how we organize and connect things into groups. We can also use a metaphor of a filing system. For example, a file folder has a name, just as a concept has a name. And inside that file folder, we put in things that belong in that folder or have the attributes of that folder, such as assessments or household items and so on. And just maybe to help, another way to look at concepts is to think of the game I Spy, where essentially what we're doing when we play I Spy is we're identifying a concept in the room with one attribute. So if I were to go I Spy with my little eye, something that is round, we would be looking for objects that have that one attribute of something round. So as a quick review, that's what concepts are. And I just throw this challenge out to you if you want it in the chat box. Just to give you an idea of what it means to look for a concept. Concepts do become visible in a image or a situation when we can look at through that lens of that concept. So I'd like you to take a look at this photograph or this image, and are there any concepts in this image that come and pop out in front of you. If you see a concept or a concept comes to mind by looking at this image, just put it down. Mountains is a concept. Thanks, Janet. Pollution, human impact, litter, these are all great. Recycling. Rock types, absolutely. Landforms, thank you. Ecosystems. Tamara has seasons, absolutely. Thanks. So you can see that when you take a look at, we can take concepts, we can find them all over the place, and that's what they are. They're organizing ideas, and they're all over in our new curriculum. What I'm going to ask you to do is just take a look at this. If we could take a look at this example here from the curriculum guide of the organizing idea of living systems. I've copied and pasted some knowledge, understanding, and skills and procedures in it. And it's really helpful to take a look at that curriculum when you first open it up and try to find those concepts. Because when you do, something interesting happens. So I'm going to give you a couple moments to maybe look at the screen, or if you have a curriculum open in front of you, to take a look at the first cusp line in living systems, and you'll see this information there. And as you glean over that information, can you find any concepts in there? In this particular case, I've outlined shape, because shape is a context. It's got examples of different shapes, and it's got attributes. It's the external outline of something. So I'll give you just a couple seconds to think about it, and I'm going to flip slides here right away so we can keep moving.
You can just even jot them down on a piece of paper. You don't have to put them in the
Sure.
chat box.
Chris, we can go to the next slide. What we've done is highlighted them all for you there. And the interesting that happens, as I said, is that you'll see some of those concepts repeated throughout not only the guiding question and the learning outcomes, but they're repeated in the knowledge component. They're in the understanding column, and they're in the skills and procedure column. When you see those concepts repeated all the time, they become really the big ones, the important ones. We call them anchoring concepts. So you really want to focus on, because as you'll see, those concepts not only live in this organizing idea in this particular grade, but as Chris mentioned, you'll see them appearing in other organizing ideas in science, not only in grade 1, but in grade 2 and grade 3 and so on. We can go into the next slide, Chris. What I've done for you here, and you'll have this as a resource for you, is I've organized all the concepts, plus a little bit more things that may not be concepts, but organize them into a concept map so you might be able to get a better picture of how this organizing idea is organized. And it's very simple to read. Just follow the arrows, and sometimes those arrows have words that help you. For example, living things can be plants or animals, and humans is classed as an animal. And they have characteristics. Plants stay in one place, make their own food, and grow. And you can see by following the arrows, you could follow that concept map. So that'll be available for you in your resource guide. As I was just mentioning, all those concepts in grade 1, a lot of them live in the next grade system and so on. And you can get a sense of this. This will be a resource available to you. Actually, it's available to you by going to the session 1 folder, which again will remind you how to get to that if you haven't been there yet. But this will have all the progressions for not only living systems on the document you get, but for all the organizing ideas. And just by way of an example, just by reading the learning outcome again, you can get a sense of how concepts move from grade 1 to grade 2. In grade 1, we're looking at animals and plants and living things and really getting an understanding of those and how their needs are met. In grade 2, we take that understanding, but we add on that plants and animals, when they get their needs met for survival, go through a life cycle. And so the whole idea of life cycle and things like that are involved in grade 2. In grade 3, that understanding moves on. So that's there for you to look at to help understand and remind you that these things, we're not living and teaching in individual topics and silos, perhaps like we have in the past, that what we do in our grade this year is going to depend on their grade next year. And you'll find that as you do going through this grade 1 curriculum, not so much in living systems, because living systems wasn't taught in kindergarten. This is the first time students will be receiving instruction in living systems. But when it comes to other organizing ideas such as matter, some of the things that are taught in kindergarten, students will be expected to know in grade 1. So we'll have to do some back teaching, and we'll point those out to you when we do those organizing ideas. So out of all that big concept map, these are the organizing anchoring concepts you'll find. And what we're going to do now is take a look and see, well, how can we investigate these individual concepts first, the surface level, and then move on to skills and procedures shortly. So Chris, I'm going to let you take over. I think you've got some ideas or some examples to share how to develop these individual concepts.
And I just want to take one step back, especially for those of you who've been with us before. And the reason that we are doing what we're doing is not putting sort of all the resources at the end, is we really want everyone to recognize the importance of what Ted has just said, in the sense of there's surface level, there's deep level, and then there's transfer. And not everything that you get as a resource fits into all three of those. Some of them I have to teach the facts, remember, and that's what we talked about in session 1. Well, these are your anchoring concepts. And so when I go back to that web that was created for you, I realize that I can't just teach the greens together and say done, teach all the pinks together, I'm done. I need to make those connections with the students so that they see how they fit together. So really, when we're talking about this, we're starting off with, I have some important concepts I need to teach to the student, and I'm going to have to teach those factual pieces, that surface foundational piece first. And so behind the scenes here, we have a number of different things that are going to be done. Do you want to talk about the card sorts first, Ted? Oh, you're muted. Sorry. You're muted, Ted.
If you don't mind, yeah, you go ahead, Chris, and I'll come in when we get to the concept attainment one. What we're going to do, maybe just by way of organizing, is once again, we're at the surface level. So there's all kinds of instructional strategies available to you to help students develop and understand those individual concepts. So Chris is going to show you an examples, and you can see the title there, Surface Strategy Number 1, card sort. Chris is going to give you an examples of how to use card sorts to help develop the concepts, living things, plants and animals, and even the concept of description, which shows up in this organizing idea.
And so remember that you're getting one person's perspective of how I might unpack this, but I do like card sorts because it tells me lots of things about students. It tells me, first of all, what their background knowledge is. It tells me maybe my students know way more than I expected them to know at this point, and that I can move forward, or maybe they don't have some background knowledge here and I need to do a couple of steps back in order to make sure that they understand. And remember, when I said that it was a spiral curriculum, we will have to be very intentional about making sure that we pick up any key concepts from a previous grade that hasn't been covered yet in my grade. So not so much for grade 1 teachers, because there is no kindergarten living systems. But in the next ones that we do, Matter, all of the other ones, kindergarten comes into play. So we will always bring back to you the key concepts that were covered in kindergarten. You might have to go back. So a card sort, in this case, we're looking for foundational knowledge about, do they even know what living and non-living is? And so there is a card sort that I will show you where those are. They're in your folder. You can cut them up and just ask the students. Here's 2 different columns. Can you find pictures that you would put into living, and can you find pictures that you would put into non-living? And that's just straight fact. That's surface level. They've got it or they don't. And then even if I ask them, can you tell me why you put it into this column? What's their rationale behind it? It's not just good enough that they did it, but talk to me about what you did. What was your thinking? So again, it helps unpack for me formatively where they're going to be. And a card sort can be used in a number of different ways. And that's the other piece that I like about them. Here's the same card sort. As I start going through living and non-living, now I might say to them, okay, you were really good at figuring out what was alive and what was not alive. Could you now take those same cards and sort them between being a plant and an animal? And in most cases, grade 1s will have very little problem with that. So they can get their header cards, and those are also in your folder. And now they resort them. And we could even go one step further and say, wow, look at all the animals that you found. Could you even group the animals differently and see what they come up with? Some of them might group them by the color of their fur. Some of them might group them because they have fur. Some of them might group them for different reasons. So a card sort allows me to go back over and revisit common pictures that I've already been working with, but then I also have the opportunity to tease out more information. So this is a powerful way for us to start that surface level info. Just because you gave them cards and they sorted them into these two columns does not mean you went deeper. Some questioning, some really intent questioning on my part might get me to a deeper level of connection, but really you're still doing surface. So this is just getting the factual stuff done. And remember, we don't live in the factual world. If we just stop at the facts, the kids will never make connections. They'll never understand what pieces go together and how they go together. And that's our role, is to make sure that they walk away understanding how those connections are. So even if I was doing this, I would also say I would be doing it in math at the same time. I would be sorting in math in the same way that I'm sorting cards in science, because that notion of sorting and finding common attributes and put those things together at the same time. And we can be really intentional about when we do those. And sorting doesn't just happen once in a math curriculum. It doesn't happen once in a science. So let's repeat it over and over and over until we're really proficient and we can start to make connections ourselves. This is one of the books that is available. It comes from Pearson. I've got some resources for you at the end that I will share with you as well. So here is another sort, which we will also share with you. And this sort actually comes from the kindergarten, and it comes from matter. So in matter, we use it from a different perspective. But here's one where the students are given a profuse number of pictures. And this is a kindergarten child. We don't expect them to read. But if we said to them, here's a whole bunch of pictures, you put them into groups any way that you want. You'll find that they'll put plants together. Sometimes they'll put all the food together. Sometimes they'll put things that move together, some things that don't move, right? So they pick their reasons for putting it the way they did. But again, those are the pieces that we really want. We really want people to understand that these are ways that I can understand where students are at and give them surface level information. I could take those now and say, can you resort them, right? And find what they find again. But here's some common ones that kindergartens gave us. So I could use these same cards with grade ones, and you have access to all of them. Color, food, instruments, people, things that were outside, things that smelled, because they were talking about their senses. So again, you could even create a word chart, regardless of the grade. What words did we use to put things together? When we had living things, what things did you use to describe them? Put them up on a word wall so that we can start to use those later when we start moving forward. I could also have just finding 10 things in a pile. So maybe I found this, I have this pile and these are all of animals. What animals can you find that are not in your pile? Can you find pictures of them? Can you go outside? Do you have animals? Do you live on a farm? Right? Just get the kids to start adding some things. They don't necessarily have to be in the card sort, but the card sort is your start. Okay, the second one could be a case study. And I like case studies. A case study can take two different perspectives. I could say, I don't know if they know anything about living systems and non-living systems. Maybe I'm going to read them a book. And the book might be about one item or both. In this case, the book I'm thinking of is called I Know It's Living. So what if I hadn't done the card sort? What if I left the card sort for later? What if I read the story and said to children, I want you to listen to what the story I'm going to read. And at the end, I'm going to ask them, what did we learn about living things? And see if they can tell us, what do living things do? That they breathe, that they need water, they need a place to live, and all those different pieces. Because then I can also add, what do you think then non-living things would have on their list? So now we're making them think in terms of, what do I know about living? What do I think non-living would have, right? And we can do a card sort after that if we want. So it provides a pre-assessment opportunity for me. But a case study allows me to present something to them, and then I use that to springboard off of to teach the pieces that I want to do. Doing a case study can be done in kindergarten. It could be done in grade 12. You can pick. I can also take a case study to make a summative. I'm going to read you 3 stories, and now can you make me a Venn diagram in kindergarten, a Venn diagram to show me what was the same and what was different. And did they have anything that was the same for both sides, right? We teach students how to do that. A Freyer model would be another one. I know a number of you know that. So maybe in this case, I'm going to use a Freyer model. Again, I'm just at surface. This is just info. Do they get the info? So I could watch these two quick videos. One is a story, one is a video. And I could ask them, can you give me an example based on what we just learned? Could you give me an example of something that's living? Draw a picture, right? And they can explain what their picture is if they're not good at drawing. Can you give me an example that's not something that's alive? So again, what's the reasoning behind it? So the Freyer model would be another way for me to go in and verify their thinking, start the thinking. Any one of these could be your starting point or a follow-up point, whichever way you want to go. Okay, so I'll let you go for concept attainment on that one. You're going to take it over from there, Ted?
I'm just going to go over another instructional approach that many of you are likely familiar with. It's a concept attainment approach. It provides examples and non-examples, and as students see the examples and non-examples appear, they start making hypothesis or predictions or a formulation of what all the examples have in common to identify what that concept is. And I'll just do an example quickly for you. I won't go through all with you, but I'll show you what one looks like. Maybe Chris, if you could pick on the link to dependence. You can see there's a whole bunch there, but we'll just show you one, how it looks. If you can go to slide number 2. Slide number 2 just gives you, if you haven't seen it before, slide number 2 explains what the concept attainment lesson looks like, the steps involved. But I'll go through it with you quickly without having you do too much thinking here. So we'll just quickly go through the slides here, Chris.
Okay.
We can advance if you can. Good. So it begins by giving examples and non-examples. Whoopsie, we've gone to the last kind of where the end of it here.
Oh, okay. It's not advancing in the right order then.
There. Okay. Okay. There's slide number 1. Go to slide 2, which would have the steps.
Oh, it's going back.
Okay. And the next slide should be slide 3, which has the baseball on it and a car. There we go. So in this particular activity, examples and non-examples are provided. The yeses are example of the idea that I have in mind, and the no's are not. In this particular case, I have a dependence in mind. And so we have a picture of a battery and a flashlight. That's an example of dependence. And we have a picture of pencil crayons and a battery, and that's not an example. As you go through the examples, non-examples, I have another set on the next slide. We get students to think about, whoa, we're flying.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, I think you get the idea that they're just present examples and non-examples. In this particular, we have wind in a kite and a wind in a lamppost. And then at the end of it, you ask kids, well, what do the yeses have in common, of course? And then you provide some more sets and say, well, which are these two as an example? Which would fit in the yes? And you try to give an example of something that demonstrates dependence. They are on the slides, but I think things aren't working too smoothly with the slides right now. So we can click out of there, Chris.
Okay.
But just by giving examples, non-examples, it's kind of similar to the card sort. The only difference.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, guys. Need you to stay muted, please.
So at the end of the day, you can use the example, non-example as a way to develop those concepts at the surface level again. Just because we go through this activity with the students doesn't mean they're going to remember for a long time. At the surface level, they have to keep on working with each of these concepts that we use at the surface level and move them on so that they become really comfortable in using those words. So there's some more examples there for you when you get the chance, and they'll be available for you in your resource pack. Let's move on to skills and procedures. The skills and procedures are also actually, the way we're unpacking it should be taught at the surface level. And I'll show you what I mean. When we have a skill, there's really typically some steps involved with it. And so if we're doing comparison and contrast, for example, we know that students look at the things first. They're going to make a choice whether it's similar or different based on a certain criteria. And then they're going to come to a conclusion whether they've got a similarity or difference. There are different steps to different skills, but it's not just knowing the skill, it's also performing the steps and performing with increased mastery and increased independence as well. So there's the steps and then the performing it. That's still at the surface level. When we do take a look at the skills and procedure statements in the organizing idea of living systems, which is the next slide. Go ahead, Chris. I've highlighted the verbs. And the reason I highlighted the verbs is because that's really what we want to focus on at the surface level. It's not the content that goes along with it. It's observe, describe, represent, determine. And you'll see in brackets at the end of some of the statements, I have a different verb, which I think really is what we're getting at here. And the reason I used conclude is because in grade 1 scientific methods, that is one of the steps in the scientific investigation. The concept of making conclusion is there. So if we take away all of the content related components of the statements, we're left with just the skills, and that's what shows up on the next slide. So the key skills really associated with this organizing idea are compare, contrast, represent, conclude, which again, as I mentioned, part of the investigative investigations, describe, and discuss. Now, just because they're in science, I'm going to stop. Sometimes what we want to do is, I guess, two things. Number one, we want to teach these outside of the context of science per se. We want to use content that students are familiar with when we're first getting to compare and contrast, for example. When we're first having them describe something, we don't want to jump into the content because we want them to get used to and become familiar with and competent in the skill first. And the way to do that is to keep practicing the skills whenever you can. When we take a look at the skills in living systems and science, we would use those in art or English language arts and literature and all the other courses. We can have students discuss in all those courses. Can they come to a conclusion in math? Can they come to a conclusion in language arts after maybe reading a story together? Can they determine what might happen next? Can they predict? Can they make representations of different things? Yeah, so when we say that, let's really work with these skills at the front end, at the surface level, and teach just so they become familiar with the words and the skills. Then when we add on the content, they'll be much more successful at demonstrating the understanding. I added some other skills in there that you'll see in each organizing idea because they are associated to scientific methods and computing science. Those will be unpacked for you at a separate time through some videos. Those organizing ideas will be unpacked for you at a separate time. But just so you know, when we take a look at each organizing idea, there's room for the scientific methods and there's room for the computer science components as well, because they are process-oriented organizing ideas. So the skills and processes in them can be embedded in the living systems. And once again, when you take a look at those skills and procedures closely in those organizing ideas, they're not ones that are just stuck in science necessarily. Maybe the process of the scientific investigation of asking questions, predicting, observing, recording data, making conclusions as a whole, that's an investigation. But we would have students make observations, predictions, and having them ask questions in all the courses we teach. So as individual skills, the more we can get kids doing these things, the more successful they'll be not only in science, but their other courses as well. We could see a similar thing with computer science. It may seem spooky to talk about computer science in grade 1, but if you do take a look at the key things in there, we're asking students to know what instructions are, to follow 2 or 3 or 4 step instructions, and to sequence instructions to achieve a certain outcome. So those can be integrated easy along the way, but we're just going to focus on living systems in this particular presentation right now. So those few skills.
And I just want to add, in case some of you are saying, really, I have to teach computing science at the same time? you're already doing it. If once you watch the video, you will recognize that, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I was doing computing science. I just maybe didn't name it. So you can relax. It's not about programming robots and having them walk around your class. It really is about sequencing of instructions. And the minute they arrived at your doorstep this year in school, you said, this is our door. When you come to the door, your shoes are going to go here. You're going to line up. You're going to come to the classroom. We get in the classroom. This is what happens. That is a computing science algorithm. You gave me a rule and I followed it. It's a set of instructions. So again, it's one of those things that'll be unpacked for you, but not to be anxious about the fact that I've never done computing science before.
I'm going to mention one other thing before Chris gives some examples. If you can go back to the other slide, please, Chris.
There we go.
One more. There we go. Related to each skill is a concept. So when we take a look at represent, for example, students represent something either in a diagram form or a sculpture or some other representation. That's what they're creating is a representation. If students understand what a representation is, a conclusion is a concept, a description, a discussion, and so on. If they recognize what a similarity and differences, they're going to be better able to do those things. If they know what a similarity and difference is, they're going to be better at comparing and contrasting. So all those concepts that I have there are actually ones that you can work with as well. When you go back to the concept development phase of this, at the surface level, there's examples of how you can introduce those concepts as well. So when you do get into the skill development, it'll be a little bit easier for them as well. Go ahead, Chris.
So a Venn diagram would be one of those. And sometimes people say, oh, grade ones can't do Venn diagrams. Sure they can. We just need to teach them what it means and what it's all about. So a Venn diagram is, research tells us, one of the most powerful ways that we can ask students to give us information, because I can't do a Venn diagram with just one bit of fact. I basically can't even do it with just 2 facts. I need to be able to have a lot of facts at my disposal where I can start to make connections between them and say, what is different? What are each one of them represent? But then there's a common piece in between that both of them share. And that's that piece that we're talking about. So using those early on is really kind of important. So this is an example of one that we did. Hula hoops make the best Venn diagrams. They don't have to know how to write, just put them on the floor with the kids and give them some cards. And even if I had put animals and plants and they had nothing in the middle, then they'd realize that the animals and plants didn't have anything in common. But I changed the terminology around it and I say maybe they need basic needs. What are the basic needs? Well, both plants and animals, they need shelter, they need food, they need air, they need water. And we didn't teach that to them right off the bat. We asked the students to figure that out on their own and letting them muck around a little bit about why they put the cards where they did. So it gives you a sense of what they're able to understand and what connections they're starting to make. And we're still pretty surface level here, right? We're still just taking the basic needs and do they even understand that? And where is it going to go? And what do I need to be alive? And I need these certain things to be alive. And what does an animal do? It moves. What about a plant? Does it move? No, it doesn't move. Okay, that's the one thing that was very different about them. A plant is green. A person or an animal isn't green, right? It doesn't have chlorophyll in it. It doesn't have the same thing that a plant would. So they start to learn quickly. So this is really what you saw there, just so that it's a little easier to read. Just put into an interactive one. But doing it on the floor with them is simple. Just giving me some terms, some cards. I can get off my chair. I can get on the floor. I can work with a partner and we can decide where we're going to put things. So surface level would still be those questions such as you're seeing here. What are the basic needs of a pet? Maybe they have a pet at home. Okay, they can connect with that. Maybe they live on a farm. They have farm animals. What are the basic needs of a farm animal? Do they just show up and nobody has to look after them, or do we have to feed them and make sure they have water and that they have a place to sleep when it's really cold and all those different things? Okay, so what are the basic needs of a plant? How do we look after plants in our house? And that's usually when you hear from the kids, oh my, we don't have plants in our house because they always die. So that's a good question to talk about. Why do they? Well, because we forget to water them. So water is important, right? So we can have those conversations just to get past those factual pieces and start to make some connections. Walk around your schoolyard and identify the basic needs of 2 different living things, something you didn't talk about in class. Let them go off and do a walkabout if you have a bit of a bush behind your school where you can all go and walk around there. What do they see? What kind of plants do they see? Do they see any bugs? Do they see whatever, right? Can they start to make some connections of the things you just taught me with 2 things that I can find outside that's different, right? So that's an important piece for them to start making some connections, and how are they related? Okay, want to talk about direct teaching?
Sure, I'll talk about this briefly. Another strategy that's really helpful at the surface level is the direct teaching of skills strategy. It's taking skills, any thinking skills or procedure, and teaching it explicitly. It's not, in other words, you give it a name, you break it down into steps, explain the steps to the students, and you demonstrate the steps as a class and provide guided practice in different contexts for kids to practice that skill. It's something we do often in other things like math and maybe phys ed or so on. But when it comes to thinking, we sometimes just jump right into it and we say, compare and contrast this without breaking it down. Or we just, especially some of those higher level skills, if we're going to even find similarities or something like that, just breaking it down so that kids can get it. And we'll give an example here by taking a look at the next slide. This is related to comparing and contrasting. Again, the next slide. In this particular case, there's using that comparative language and the descriptive language, but there's on the right side, you can see the what to do. And so if we're going to compare and contrast something using that language and descriptive language, there's 3 steps in this particular scenario to follow. And if we could do that with all our skills, we'll probably be more successful at getting kids to really be metacognitive about what they're doing. Okay, I'm finding similarities and differences right now. I've got to do this, and I've got to do this, and I've got to do this. And so the direct approach is sometimes really helpful when you're introducing a skill at the surface level.
And remember that those skills that Ted is talking about are skills we need to teach the children because we are assessing them as well. So that means that in a perfect world, at the end of the year, if I were to give them a bit of a mini test and they had a word on there that we don't have 21 hands going up saying, what does that mean? That's our goal, is to integrate that with the factual knowledge that we're moving along to get them to integrate those and use those as part of their demonstration of learning. So it's not about me continuously telling you what it means. Now, in a perfect world in the first year, am I going to have to do that? Of course we will. And we'll always be reminding, especially our little ones, that, let's remember. But the goal is that they're going to move through all of the grades learning those skills. So grade 1 teachers will be doing it, grade 2 will be doing it, and they have additional ones that get added on. It isn't about grade 1 saying, hey, we'll do these 5, grade 2s, you do these 5. No, we want to make sure that we're being true to the intent of the skill that's being presented within your grade. So it's an ongoing learning that we're going to do all the way through. This actually comes from kindergarten. This is the kindergarten one where I could do this and just put things, even after I've taught them how to do this, I could put a bunch of stuff in a bag and say, reach in and tell me what you would use to describe what you're feeling, right? Good descriptive words. Did they know what that means?
And once again, thanks, Kristen. Once again, even using examples or context or situations that kids can really easily relate to, so they get excited about it. And it's not necessarily course connected to the course, because you want them to be focused on the skill and what they're doing, and they want to be focused on the feedback you give them rather than competing with the content. As you'll see, once they become familiar with that skill, then they can use that skill to demonstrate what they know and what they understand. Discussion is another skill that shows up in grade 1 and in all the grades, actually. It's a big one. I'm going to give you a skip back one slide, Chris. I just want to point out to the link. We don't have to go to that link, but right there, the discussion checklist, don't have to go to that, but it's a discussion checklist of really, if a discussion's happening in a classroom, what should a student be able to do in a discussion? It goes through things like, of course, so you can imagine listening, being respectful, asking questions, and things like that. Again, taking time to talk about students, what a discussion is, how we do it, what are some things to look for, modeling it and practicing it. When they are practicing, when you're asking them to discuss something course related, they'll know what to do, and they'll be able to use that skill of discussing to demonstrate to you what they know and understand far better what they do when they're not too sure what a discussion is and they don't know how to participate and so on. Of course, it doesn't mean you get to be masterful before we do this, but we do have to, give students an opportunity to really know what that means to discuss and give examples of it and practice it a few times before they really put it into practice to demonstrate what they know and understand in terms of course-related content. And again, we always, if you go to the next slide, as grade 1 teachers, you're probably familiar with this next slide, but there's more than one way to have a discussion. It's not necessarily sitting around in a group or in rows or wherever they may be and just putting up the hands and sharing ideas. There's gallery walks, there's circle of viewpoints, there's conversations, the fishbowl, think, pair, share, a lot of things like that you're familiar with. And these are all Googleable. I don't have links to all of them. I didn't put links to all of them in because I didn't find some good ones yet. But those are all ways that we can organize our classrooms so that students practice those discussion skills in different ways. They get good at it and get some feedback on it. And these are really become really good opportunities for feedback to you when you get the students to discuss in these ways and you listen in. You could very easily find out what they know and understand and where you need to maybe pick up some things with some students. Same thing goes with the next skill that's also in this organizing idea. Representing, you're all familiar with that. And we do a lot of representing in the primary grades because the writing is a little bit hard, especially at grade 1. So we find students to represent what they know and understand through a variety of ways. And again, the next slide shows an example of a lot of those that you know. There are things like comic strips, a song, a poem, a sculpture, clay sculptures, dioramas. There's all kinds of ways that students can represent what they know without necessarily writing it out. Again, depending on where you want to choose and where you want your students to focus on, they're not going to do all of those, but whichever ones you think are going to be important for students to represent, again, give them some practice with it, with something they're not familiar with, so that when they do represent what they're knowing that's course related, it'll be a good representation. If it's a comic strip, there's certain characteristics or qualities of the comic strip, for example, that should have. And if students know that, then they can better use it to demonstrate their understanding. And understandings, let's go there. We can go to that next slide, Chris.
Yeah.
If you missed the session 1, I'm just going to take a couple minutes to just restate a couple things. In the surface level, we are taking a look at the individual concepts. That's the surface level. We could take a look at plants, animals, dependence, needs. Those are all individual concepts. We develop examples of them. They give examples of needs, examples of plants, examples of animals, examples of dependence. That's all at the surface level. When it comes to skills, we've had them learn a little bit about discussing, and they're becoming better at that. And they know how to make a representation. Let's say I'm going to use the example of a comic strip again. They've practiced that. So I know that's how I'm going to want them to represent their understanding with those concepts. That's when I put them all together, and that's where you see the 3 squares and that cloud over there. The 3 boxes or cubes connected by lines is the understanding. They're concepts, separate concepts connected together in an understanding. And we could see those understandings in the next slide. There are 3 of them in living systems. If we can go to the next slide, please, Chris. And you could see the concepts pop out at you, right? If we develop those individually, now when we put them together in the understandings, we combine them, we have something totally new than just the separate individual pieces of knowledge of plants, animals, similarities, and differences, for example. The understanding is that plants and animals share similarities and have differences, or plants and animals require environments that allow them to meet their needs. You'll notice we didn't have environments of our list of anchoring concepts. That's because environment is introduced and covered in kindergarten. So again, an example of how kindergarten and grade 1 bridge and things we learn in grade 1 are going to show up in grade 2 as well. So there may have to be some back teaching there. But the point here is that the understandings are composed of those individual concepts. And it's impossible to create a good, solid understanding if students aren't really well versed in those individual concepts. And then what you'll do is we'll see if you, in the next slides is we've also covered the skills of the surface level. Now we could take skills such as compare and contrast to help develop this understanding that plants and animals share similarities and have differences. We've already taken those 4 concepts to the previous surface learning component, but now we put it together and have them really work at it. So Chris, I think you have some examples to share, I believe.
Absolutely. So we might go back and just grab those same card sorts that we started with. We're going to reuse them over and over and over again. So now I might say, take your card sorts and set them up in things, how things are related, without telling them what the relationship would be. So a lot of times what students will do is they'll put all the animals together and they'll see the animals as being different than the birds, right? Or something that's not looking like the typical animal that's up here. And remember, I'm going to just point it out right now, is that one of your outcomes or one of your parts of your outcomes that you're learning is also to identify commonly found animals in Alberta. So we want them to be able to identify animals that are found in Alberta. In these card sorts that you have, you'll find that the card has a number on it. And in your folders, I've actually given you the list of the names that correspond to each of the numbers in case you don't know the animal yourself, like I mean, if it's an unfamiliar one to you. But in this case, we just asked the students to sort them. What would you put together? And then let them talk to us about how are they related? What's up here and how are they related? What's down here? How are they related? So now they're going to take that factual piece and start to make some connections between those boxes that we had. In some cases, students said, I'm going to sort them by the number of legs that they had. So they said 4 legs. These guys had no legs and they don't move. These guys had no legs, but they do move. And these guys had 2 legs or 2 wings. Okay, they were quick to say that it didn't necessarily mean that because they had 2 feet, that's how they worked. So that's how students, now they might go with feathers. They might say fur. Like, what is the guiding term that they're using to make those connections and those relationships? And students get better at that. And the more we give them opportunities to make those connections and explain them, okay, that's the important piece, to explain them to us. Don't just, yep, got it, check, we're done. What's the thinking behind it? So movement is another one. That's how the students, some of them argued. They said, well, we went by movement. If they have 4 legs versus 2 legs or 2 wings, or they have no legs, but they were still able to move. That was their snake group and their snail group and whatever. They said, we don't see any legs on there. In one of the resources that I share with you in here, down at the bottom, we won't play it right now, but it talks about different types of movement. It also goes beyond what the cards did. Now it shows them some animals that have hundreds of legs. Right? That's something they haven't seen before. So where are they going to put that now? Right? Do they want to put that with moves and has legs, or move and has way more than 4 legs? So again, it's giving them those opportunities to see how things might fit together. What about the fish? Right? Now we're going to see pictures of fish in here. We're going to see things that don't have fins and yet they're still moving in water, like jellyfish. Again, it gets kids to think outside the box, but make the connections between what have I learned about things that are alive and move and things that don't move, and that I can look very different and still move. So again, these are just samples that you'll have on these slides. You'll have these slide decks. You'll be able to access them as well.
Welcome to Mumu Math and
Sorry, whenever we put one in there, we always get that to come up. So again, maybe you want to give them some books. Maybe you give them books of different types of animals. One of the suggestions we even had is go for a virtual field trip. Go to the zoo. Why don't we go find some animals at the zoo that we just don't see in our backyard, that I don't see walking around Alberta? How would I categorize them? Why would I put them into certain relationships? What do I see in them that I would put with my pet dog, right? How are they the same? Would they put a wolf with a pet dog? Why? Well, they kind of look the same. They have the same fur. They have 4 legs. They run the same. One might be more vicious than the other, but right now we're starting to make connections between what I'm seeing. So again, when they get a story and they see a bunch of animals, where would they put them? So that could be that video, could be a storybook, could be both. What do I see here? You know, how do I see these animals? How are they connected to each other? And then I could even go one step further and say, are these animals that we would actually as humans benefit from? Do we get anything out of having one of these animals? Some people have birds, they love birds, they raise birds. Some have bunnies, some have dogs. Why do we have dogs? Just we like them or we just have them? Usually it's because it's mutual, right? They give us some comfort and some love. So that's one of our understandings as well, is how do animals and humans interact? How do we help each other? If I live on a farm, what do the animals there look for from me, right? That's another piece. So one of the understandings, plants and animals require environments that allow them to meet their needs. Again, we could say at this time of the year, when you look up at the sky, sometimes you hear a whole bunch of different sounds coming from the sky. Why do you think that's happening? What's happening up there? They might say, well, birds are coming back, or you hear Canada geese, and where are they coming back from? Well, they're coming back where it was warm because they don't live in our winters, versus what animals do live in our winters, right? If some of you have been out cleaning your front lawns and back lawns, you might have a whole bunch of little tunnels that have been borrowed into your grass already, because the voles that lived underneath the snow were eating your grass all winter, and now they've damaged it. You're probably not happy with them. But again, we have that conversation. We can start extending those. So different environments allow plants and animals to meet different basic needs, right? So again, where am I at? Use your plant cards and your animal cards. How would you sort them based on environment? Are there different groups that you would put together now that need common environments or different environments? What do they have in common? What environment did you put them in? And what are you seeing that they have in common? Those simple card sorts go back over and over, but they're always seeing them from a different perspective once we put it out there for them. So in here, we also have, so this is a resource page for you, but it's first a resource page. Still a lot of surface stuff happening here, because again, I need some info before I can make a conclusion or even make a prediction about what kinds of different environments I might want. Caring for plants and animals. How do I care for them? Do plants fill needs for humans? Most of the time we think, oh, we just water the plants. But could we live as adults? Can we live as human beings without plants? Can we live as human beings without animals? Can we live without both? The answer is definitely a yes and no to one of those, but again, that's something that they can unpack. Watching this one, Can We Live Without Plants, is a really important little video for grade ones to listen to and for them to make some conclusions about. Again, importance and uses of animals in Indigenous culture. We heard about how man is not at the top of the food chain there, that man is equal to the slug that grows on the grass, and that the rock who also has a spirit in it, that one is not more important than the other. So that's important for people to realize, and for us to have students get that opportunity to have those connections and make. So this is an important page for you just for resources. And then again, we can start to make connections for them. So let's go back to our understanding, right? Humans and animals, plants and animals, what's the dependency that we have?
If I could just stop for a second, Chris,
Yep,
I
for sure.
just, you notice everyone, and Chris too, that slide that was previous is more related to this as well. So
It is.
why, yeah, my apology, I didn't.
No, but it is, yep.
Yeah, I connected out of there, so thanks.
And dependence, it's not in our curriculum, but really it's implied that one depends on the other. And how do they depend on each other? I depend on plants for food. I depend on animals for food. I depend on animals for comfort, but the animal also needs me in order to survive. I need to feed it. I need to give it water. I need to give it exercise, and so on. So this is where this is starting to go into, is how does that triad work between humans and plants and animals? So again, here's your virtual zoo. They may see animals that they don't even know the names of, but that's a good place for us to start unpacking. What's the dependency there? When you go to a zoo, who's dependent on who? And is it only one way, or is it two ways? Do people go to a zoo for enjoyment, right? It goes two ways. It's not always that I get something physically out of it. How do these animals help humans? We could have a conversation with our students. We could ask them to pick a picture and talk about it. If they can't write it yet, talk about it. How are they helping humans? Only in one way? Is there more than what they can see? So again, it's starting to make those connections and those linkages to the things that we've been learning all along. So the sort of the final piece to that dependency is maybe you want to even talk about interdependency, right? I have one depends on the other, and that's true in the world that we live in. We are very interdependent with other living things in our world. It's not just man lives all by himself and he needs nothing else to get to a normal survival. So this video that you have up here talks a little bit about how things depend on one another and shows them a bit more of that cycle of how that interdependency fleshes out. It's not in their curriculum again, but the implication is there. So maybe you want to go there with your students and give them an opportunity to find a plant and an animal that are independent or interdependent on each other and explain why. Again, it could be a walk around the yard. If you live in the city and you could go out for a farm visit field trip, great field trip to go and see. What are the dependencies and interdependencies out there? For some of our students that live in a city, they've never seen a farm before, they haven't been there. That's a great experience for them. Okay, Ted, want to carry on? Oh, I can keep going then.
I
So
know. No,
yeah.
my apology. I'm still getting used to that clicking off and off of the mute button. I'm sorry, everyone.
No,
When it comes to scientific methods, we have Nicole Lamoureux, who's working with us through the RLC. She's putting together grade-specific sessions on scientific methods. She has a video done for grade 1 scientific methods that will be available in your resource package after we're done here today. It's about a half hour that unpacks scientific methods and gives examples of how to build the concepts in it, how to practice the skills, and so on. And so that's there for your disposal as well. And it's important to unpack that one early and look at it early, because as you'll find, and I'll give you an example later on, the concepts and the skills and scientific methods can really beef up each unit organizing idea. It won't necessarily appear in there, but to help develop those skills, you can integrate it into every organizing idea. Besides that, we have computer science as well. Maybe Chris, can you speak to this? You're more familiar with this video than I am.
So we're going to also be infusing computing science supports for you as well. And Angela Deering will be the one who's going to come in and do that work for you. Again, those will be put into your folder so that you can watch them separately, because we could have put them into the slide deck, but then the fear that we had was that, oh, you know, you got a 5-minute block. Well, in 5 minutes, not really going to do service and justice for you as teachers. So we said, let's leave them outside and separate so that you can unpack it fully for the teachers, and then you can watch it. But Ange will do a fantastic job of giving you everyday examples that you're already doing, but maybe you didn't name it as computing science. And now you can start to bring that language out as we're unpacking different concepts. We can tie those in. But as Ted said at the beginning, just because computing science only showed up in the new science curriculum doesn't mean that's where it lives. It lives in math. It lives in LA. It lives in any subject that you have. And so we will be bringing Angela in to do the K-6 math as well. We're going to start tying in the computing science there so that the language that you use around computing science, and again, I'm going to reiterate for you, it's not about programming. That's not the world of K-3, for sure not. It will get there eventually, but that will be a smooth transition for you. And that's not what you have to do in your grade. So right now it's really understanding, what is it? When am I already doing it? And how should I name it for the students so that they start to learn the language that goes with it? So assessment, you want to start on that one?
Sure, I'm going to begin talking about assessment by taking a look back at that list of skills and procedure statements from that one column. Because now we can start looking at that column through the lens of assessments. Before we looked at this information through the lens of surface learning. What are the specific skills that need to be mastered and practiced and that kids need to get good at? Now we can take that skill and say, well, do something with it to demonstrate your understanding. So represent plants and animals, for example, in various environments. If kids know what that representation is and they've practiced doing a representation with something they're not responsible for, now they can probably make a better representation that will better represent their understanding of that particular thing they're representing. You'll notice that I highlighted things in pink and in blue. What I'm trying to separate here for you is some things that can happen at the surface and the deep level. The things in pink really are assessments at the surface level. We want to make sure kids understand certain things by formally assessing them at that surface level. Can they provide examples of plants and animals? The ones that are native to Alberta and Canada are part of it, but can they distinguish between plants and animals? That's at the surface level. The bottom one, again, what are products made using plants and animals? That's sort of the concept, right? Things made out of plants and animals. And we're using First Nations ones as the examples. The other ones get into the deep learning. When you take a look at this closely, they're really combining the various concepts. So that when it comes to that whole piece of assessment, if we just did what's in the skills and procedures, that wouldn't be enough. And I'll show you what I mean on the next slide. I've taken the blue ones out because they're the deep ones, but there's other ways we can assess as well. We can classify images as plant or animals and always get kids to justify the classification. What about similarities and differences? Before we have them compare and contrast, we want to really make sure they understand what similarities and differences are, so we can do some formative assessments there. We know that environment is a kindergarten concept, but we want to assess it beforehand and maybe identify different environments in the school area, because we know that could be something they want to do later on, and identify different types of plants or animals they find in those different environments there. We want to know that students understand what dependence is, because we talk about plants and animals being dependent on other people or other things and people being dependent on plants and animals for our needs. That idea of dependence needs to be dealt with first. And so those little things are things don't forget about, I guess. When we see the list of skills and procedures, it doesn't necessarily hit all the things we want to formatively assess before we move on to deep.
And I want to remind, sorry, go ahead.
Chris.
I was going to say, just want to remind you, based on what Ted has just showed you, 85% of your teaching time with students should live in the world of deep, right? That's our goal. It's not surface. Our goal is deep. And that's where we should be hanging our hats in time, regardless of what subject it is, new curriculum or old curriculum. That's just an assessment fact. So if we live in surface, we're going to lose them at some point. They're going to fall off the rails because they won't be able to make the connections. It's in the world of deep that you live. And I think he's done a brilliant job of putting those together for you.
So the next slide highlights those skills and procedure statements that really are actually deep. And when you look at them carefully, they really include an understanding of some sort. For example, represent plants and animals in various environments. That was one of the understandings. Discuss how humans, that's the last one, depend on plants and animals to meet their needs. Here again, they're using the skill of discussing to demonstrate to you an understanding. And so the better kids are at discussing, the higher quality their communication of their understanding is. But we don't necessarily have to be stuck, I don't think, on using that particular phrase, discuss how humans depend on plants and animals to meet their basic needs. I think if we take a look at any of these skills, and that's why the power of having kids being good at these skills is important. What would happen if we took that last last statement and changed the word to discuss to represent? Represent how plants and animals depend, or how humans depend on plants and animals to meet basic needs. Having kids know these skills and be good at them is really important, because you can assess them in a variety of ways using different words, but then using the same understanding in the context of the question to really give you a really good assessment of where kids are at with their understanding of the understanding. Because at the end of the day, those three big understandings are the big ideas that we want kids to walk away with in this organizing idea. I have these in the wrong place. So we've already talked about discussing and representing, but those are two powerful strategies to get kids to demonstrate to you what they understand. Go ahead, Chris, you can flip through those slides. We've been through those already earlier in this presentation. Oh, I just want to stop at investigating. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
You'll notice that, and I don't go back to it, but in the Kika Steve there in the list of skills and procedures that were highlighted blue as examples of assessments at the deep level or activities to have kids do at the deep level. They don't have the word investigating in there. The curriculum writers did not put it in, but we could say, investigate, or you could ask the question, which environment in our playground has, the most plants and animals? So you can ask the question, you can make prediction. And we're talking about plants and animals, we're talking about ants and insects and other little crawly things maybe. But ask that question, make the prediction, gather the data, and form the conclusion. That's another thing to do, is have kids investigate things to really, really get at that deep learning with those understandings, and always get them to justify. How is that an example of plants and animals needing to move to different environments to meet their needs? Always ask those questions. There, Chris, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So our last part on our assessment piece is that conversation about transfer. Have they got these concepts to a point that we can give them a brand new scenario, and they would be able to take all that they've learned and apply that to a completely different scenario. So if you have been talking about dogs all the way through and you just give me a bigger dog, that's not a new scenario, right? We really want it to be something where they have to think about, what have I learned? What have I seen for relationships? What have I learned about my understanding? How am I applying that to a brand new scenario? In this case, this was just one suggestion. I'm not saying it's the only one. Design your own plant or animal, right? So now they get have a little bit of fun. What's it going to be called? It's got to be unique. What are its basic needs? Where is it going to live? What's it all about, right? So it just gives them a chance now to consolidate, maybe in a fun way, what they have learned about plants and animals, and they can make a choice whether they're going to do a plant or an animal. This particular video that's here is, I'm pointing this one out to you. It actually summarizes the entire living systems, non-living unit. Everything that we've talked about is in this one little video. So what I would not do is show that one to start with. I think this might be one to sum up. It might be one that give before transfer. Better yet, maybe it's one that when we come back and we talk about one of the other organizing ideas like Earth systems, or we talk about matter, maybe I play this one to start with as a refresh in their minds, because there's going to be things that are going to carry over into their new organizing idea. So just an FYI on that one. This is also one that this quizzes is, you can sign up for free. It doesn't cost you anything. And these are just literally traditional kinds of true false kind of questions that you could ask in there. There's a bunch more on the side if that's what you want. Not really the place I would go for as a summative. I prefer doing it with the activity where students have choice. But again, it's just a quick true or false if that's the kind of thing that you want to use. And to finish us up, I've got a number of different additional resources. Again, you have to pick and choose what's going to fit your style of teaching and where you're going to start with in unpacking these. But you have a number of different ones in here. These are plans in here. This one gives you an inquiry approach, which we pretty much already unpacked. And then you've got some characteristics of living things, so lesson plans included. So again, if you've got enough so far and you don't need more, then you don't really need this page. But if you want some ideas, then you might want to go there. There are some books that we have found that have fit really well. I've got them sitting behind me right now. I've given you who the authors are and where the publishers are. They are an excellent match, not just for grade 1. They also work for grade 2 in a number of cases. And the one book that's called a compare and contrast one, this one also works for grade 2. This one is a great book. It would work for K to 3. It's a wonderful book called Compare and Contrast. So it already makes children think in terms of living systems. What are the similarities? What are the differences? How would you compare and contrast them? It does come with a teacher's guide as well. And then we do have one that's called the Grandmother Teachings from the series that comes from Native Reflections. And that one talks about the 4 sacred medicines, the 4 sacred plants What do they do for humans? What is it? Why are they considered sacred, right? That's important for students to know and for our Indigenous students to see themselves in the classroom as well. So hopefully that gives you enough to get started on at least getting one of your units ready to get going for September. We are going to do a second one on matter, and that one happens in June so that you would have choice. But if you're trying to follow along with us, we're suggesting, not saying you have to by any stretch of the imagination, but we're suggesting living systems is a good start. And if you follow it with matter, you'll see that there are linkages already that we have to carry over from there. So that's just a suggestion that we have for you. I'll stop the recording here. Are there any questions? If you want to unmute yourself, I'll stop the recording so you don't feel like you're being